whenever you're ready.
All right. Can you hear? Will you talk into there, Nick?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Just make sure.
Do we need to lean in or?
Yeah, and you can move this too, so you can move it closer to you, or if you want to push it away.
Yeah,
But
if you're comfortable where you're at, just pull it as close to you as you can.
yeah,
Okay.
don't move.
Is that good?
Yeah. Ready, Spider? All right. He's ready. Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Pop Podcast. I am your host, Erin Groves, and I have another very special guest today. He was mentioned briefly in Steve's episode a few weeks ago, and I have Nick Sunderman on the podcast today. Welcome. Say hello.
How's it going? I didn't know I was mentioned.
Yeah.
I was. I had a shout out.
Yeah.
Hopefully good.
Yeah, Steve. Yeah.
Okay.
He was just talking about some of his friends, and he mentioned you, and I was
Okay.
like, he's coming on the podcast, and here you are a few
Got
weeks
it.
later.
It made the cut. Okay. I need to go back and listen.
He made the edit. So Nick is an entrepreneur, former pro baseball player turned entrepreneur, done many things since then, and I'm not going to take his limelight. So Nick, introduce yourself. Who are you?
Nick Sunderman. I think you did it. Nick Sunderman. Grew up in Dallas, Fort Worth. Moved around for a little bit. Baseball player. I guess I hate to say businessman, but entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it. Just day to day. So yeah.
He does a lot. He's humble over here.
Day to day, deal to deal.
Deal to deal. I like that one. So the reason that I had Nick on is he's a really cool story. So started with baseball, kind of decided that the road was coming to an end and turned entrepreneur into a retail shop. I'm not going to steal your limelight. So kind of walk us through the beginning. So coming from the Cleveland Indians organization, moving into business, walk us through that transition and the light that went off and you're like, it's time to move on for baseball and into something new.
Right. So I don't know if this is a positive example or a bad example, something not to do, but your trajectory in baseball. If somebody's a baseball person, it's on its way to ending if you go from a starting pitcher to a relief pitcher that's seldomly playing. So you've got options. Baseball's long. You sit there for 3 or 4 hours a night, and I was not playing well, and I've got a handful of buddies that I'm sitting around in the dugout or in the bullpen with, and times are bad because we would literally in a game, we would start talking about what's next. And so the game's going on, you're like, oh man, I hope we win. And you're like, yeah, what are we going to do for a job after this? We would joke and we would give each other jobs. Like I would make it up and say, oh, this person's going to be a dentist or this person's going to be a talk show host. Or we would literally just joke about people's next jobs. But I think, unfortunately, there's a little bit of truth in that. And that I still say all the time that like, if you have a plan B, you don't love your plan A. And, I'm not saying that things would have been different in baseball if we would have had a different attitude and maybe said, like, let's not think about that. Maybe we should think about, like, working out or getting better or whatever. But we were definitely on to plan B, which, we had given up on the baseball part. But then, I do think that, had a little bit of time to sit there and think about, like, I sort of had already made my mind up that I wasn't going to be a really prototypical job guy. I didn't think I was going to have the type of traditional skills that would really, at that point in time, I definitely wouldn't go back to med school or law school or anything like that. So, had been chipping away at school and taking hours and like in the off season and thought, okay, let me just try to wrap school up with a general studies degree or something. And then, start a career as an entrepreneur. I had no idea what that was going to be though. But, so just got really, really lucky in that, sports in a lot of cases for a lot of people, it will open doors. And in my case, that was, definitely true because I went straight from, getting released and baseball ending to, I had a baseball academy that my agent owned. And just in between classes, I'd go over there and do lessons for guys and end up meeting a ton of really good people. And so I had one guy that took an interest in me, and he was an entrepreneur, and he was actually running some version of a private equity fund. And uh, he liked me and was throwing different deals my way and just asking me what I wanted to do. Obviously knew I didn't want to do lessons forever, but um, one day I sort of came to find out that he owned a big apparel licensing production conglomerate. And it, just like a lot of deals they were doing, some would go well, some wouldn't go well, and decided to part ways with that business. And they were just kind of piecemealing selling the stuff. So they sold some of the licenses, they sold some of the real estate. They had a large amount of production equipment. So that was screen printing equipment, embroidery equipment, labeling, bag and tag, different stuff like that. And I was really, really close with my high school baseball coach, and my sister was a school teacher. And so I remember thinking, like, man, maybe I should buy a couple screen printing presses and some embroidery equipment and just have a nice little side hustle. Thought like maybe just get this in place. I knew enough about the way that like school vendor lists work that I was like, maybe I can go to like Dallas Independent School District and get on a vendor list to just do production for them, or Fort Worth or whatever, same thing. So I called my high school coach. I said, hey, I got a chance to buy some of this stuff. If I don't know if you get to pick and choose who you work with, and but if you do, do you think I should do this? And he said, yeah. He's like, it's all bid work. The stuff you're describing. He's like, so you got to be the lowest bid, but if you do, then I can choose those bids or whatever. So, anyways, I go back to this entrepreneur and say, hey, is there any chance you'd sell me some of that stuff? And he was like, oh, don't do that. Like, I have so many other businesses that are way better. That that thing's a dump. It's terrible. It's never going to make any money. And I was like, well, your version of not any money is different than my version, so I may still, give it a go and see what happens. He's like, have at it. Here you go. So I ended up buying, I don't even remember, a handful of screen printing presses and, dryer and, whatever. And then basically didn't know anything else beyond that. Like, I just thought, like, okay, I'll call some people and tell them that I'm doing this. And I guess like mistake number one is I didn't do your, I guess, traditional due diligence to really even think about what type of business I was getting into and the seasonality that would come with it. I think that was probably like the first mistake. Was maybe I got the stuff all set up at a really good time and it's February, and I know a lot of track coaches and baseball coaches and softball coaches, and I'm calling them all and like, hey, do you want me to do your warm-up gear? Do you want me to do your uniforms? Do you want me to do this or that? And everything was good. And then all of a sudden, like, spring sports end and you've got late spring, summer, and it's like there's nothing going on. And so I was like, oh my gosh, it's like I now have people that are I'm responsible for. And make a long story short, it wasn't really in my DNA. I didn't like sitting on my heels and waiting on things to come. And the more I asked around and talked to different people in the industry, it was that's just kind of the way things were done. It was like at that time, this is 14, 15 years ago, at that time, like there weren't what turned out to be probably some of our future competitors, like the Custom Inks of the world and different things like that. They didn't exist really at all. And so no one was doing any business to consumer marketing. So I was just sitting there thinking, like, how can I go from a service-oriented business that's just kind of on its heels waiting on a customer to call? How can I create a brand and then turn this into something where we can put buying opportunities in front of people whenever we need to? So if we're slow for a week, then let's go be more aggressive with our sales and our marketing, and then smooth out a lot of the seasonality, and then just be a lot more aggressive and assertive on trying to go get business. So and this is where, it's the corniest cliche in business, but where hard work and opportunity meet. We were just very active, and spun this program up and didn't even have a name for it at the time, but started to really realize, okay, like if we put together, a web store, a PDF, email attachment with like basically a catalog where kids can order and the parents can order and the school can order, and then we split the money with the schools, we can really displace and disrupt a lot of the traditional fundraising. So like I know when I was in high school, we had to sell discount cards and cookie dough, and it's like you're trying to be like the macho cool athlete, and you're lugging around like 4 tubs of chocolate bars, and it's just a weird thing. I'm like, I don't even know how this ever started or why this was a thing. Like college athletics and colleges in general have so many different revenue streams that are like totally applicable to high schools, but somehow high schools never really had the infrastructure to say like, okay, we should license this brand and we should sell these products and get royalties and like all the things that are in place for SMU and Baylor and all these schools to make money. Like high schools just didn't really, other than the handful of like really, I think just resource rich schools, they didn't do that kind of stuff. So anyways, long story short, just went on a run and became the largest high school fundraising business in history, and went from just, what I thought was going to be a lifestyle business in Fort Worth and maybe serve greater like DFW area schools. We ended up selling stuff to, I think, probably 15, 16,000 different schools. We would make 40 to 50 million custom products a year. So we ended up with, I think, really the first of its kind, the first real like Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, Jordan brand programs where we could take Jordan brand merch that Michigan gets and we could put together and brand your high school with that stuff. Like we were the first real program or business that ever had something like that. And, I've done a lot of different businesses since then. I sold that business 7 years ago, done a lot of different things since then, but I definitely think when my career is totally over, that business, just the simple fact that, the better that we did, the customer did as well. Like if the customer didn't do well, they didn't have a successful experience or a successful campaign with us, then we weren't successful either, because basically the more that they sold, the more money they made, and then the better we did at producing and fulfilling all those items. And then the orders that came in that were relatively small, we didn't make much money on them. So I've told a lot of my friends in other industries that just the way that our business proposition was structured, I wish that there were more things like that. It's like if you went in to get your car fixed, then the faster and the better job they did getting it done, the more I'd be willing to pay, But it's like if everything was kind of even a more free market system where it's like, hey, I'm going to pay you based on how good of job you do. I think in a lot of industries, people would be trying to do a better job as opposed to just checking boxes and punching clocks. And that was really our business. Is we had a huge investment in the people that we worked with, because if they didn't make money, we didn't make money. And so, just over the course of really from 2007 until today, I mean, I haven't been involved in the business for a few years now, but it's still thriving, doing great. It's still one of the predominant ways that every high school team in the United States raises money. So I think that's been great.
Well, it's so interesting because you touch on a few things that are common themes and things that you hear a lot of entrepreneurs say. But the first thing I want you to touch on a little bit more is, this is, I think a lot of listeners out there, you think that you have to have this elaborate plan and this business plan that's 100 pages long with XYZ to build this huge, multi-million-dollar business. And you're a testament that you're like, I just needed to buy a couple things, go out and start calling people, and the rest filled in its place. So kind of touch on that from your perspective of just doing,
right,
and the rest will fill in behind you, or you'll figure it out. I mean,
right.
You figured it out, and you had,
right.
no idea when you walked into it. You're like, t-shirt's a t-shirt.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I definitely don't want to claim that the way I did it is maybe the only way or the best way to do it. I think there's probably other businesses, and even businesses that I'm in, that the mistakes that I made they'd be killer. Like it would have ended the business. Fortunately, I think you and I talked about this earlier, that if somebody has interest in starting a business, I think they should do it yesterday. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. I write little notes to my kids all the time. Just, it sounds kind of morbid, but you just never know if you're going to get around to saying the things that you want to say, or, God forbid you're not even around to say them at all. But I've written them both notes and tried to structure things in such a way that they'll be heavily incentivized to start a business immediately when they get out of school. Because I feel like, kind of going back to answer your question, like part of, me not having a business plan, I could fail, and I didn't want to fail, but, I didn't have a significant other. I didn't have kids. If we made a couple mistakes, it wasn't do or die. We could pivot, we could regroup. And I don't know that I would have been as persistent or risky if I'd had so many other people that I'm having to come home to and say like, oh, hey, yeah, we can't do that anymore because such and such didn't work out, like, so I think, depending on who you are and what you're going into, you may or may not have to be more calculated. So I've got a particular business that I'm in right now that we need to be precise. We need to be very focused. The type of business that it is, the people that work there, it's very, very costly. And we don't have the margin for error that we did in my previous business. But I think, regardless of how good your business plan is, you can spend 4 or 5 years and you think you got everything figured out perfectly, and something's going to go wrong, and your ability to quickly recognize like what's going on around you, like what things did you think were going to work that aren't working, and vice versa. The quicker you figure that out, and the quicker you're able to pivot and sort of calibrate, the better off you're going to be. Like, nobody's business plan is 100% perfect. Now, I probably am the extreme example of like had nothing. I didn't even know, I had no idea how many student athletes there were, how many schools there were, what the market size was. And to be fair, I don't think anyone really knew.
Yeah.
I mean, Nike and Adidas and a lot of these people, they now directly sell into schools to address this channel, which 16 years ago, 17 years ago, that wasn't even a thing. Like, I think people were like, okay, sure, like, yeah, a booster club president is buying hoodies and selling them in a concession stand, or somebody's making bedazzled shirts, but I don't think anyone was ever really stopping and going like, okay, hang on. There's 7 million kids playing varsity athletics, and they've all got, 2 to 3 supporters, and the average spend is 120. No one had ever stopped and gone like, oh, hang on, like school uniforms are this big a business, and then spirit wear is this big, and then there's a whole nother category that's, oh, this is another $5 billion industry. I don't think anyone had ever really done that. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's great to go in and know like who your competitors are. I think the one piece of advice I love to give everybody, I give it to everyone I work with, and I remind myself of it almost every day, that whenever you're going into a space, you got to have a really good reason to want to go do it, number one. But like once you're into it, and this is what you do, and this is how you're making your living, best thing you can do is make a list of things that like someone could do to disrupt you. Like, what things make you nervous? If your biggest rival or your biggest competitor did this, and this, it would scare the crap out of you or put you out of business. But know what things someone or anyone could do that would make your life miserable, and then beat them to the punch and go do those things. Like, you're basically creating your own to-do list. Because if someone did that would put you out of business, then you need to figure out a way to go do those things to make sure that you're the first to go do it and no one can do that to you. And so I think we did that a lot. And if you do that, then as a byproduct of that, what happens is you're just consistently raising the bar, and you're like raising the standard for, for your customer or whoever your buyer is. You're trying to exceed their expectations. So every year, if like, oh man, no one can be faster delivering product than us. Like, if that's a vulnerability and someone can deliver product faster, then you need to figure out how to get product faster. If pricing is a weak spot for you and someone's going to come in cheaper, then you need to find a way to, increase your buying, or, get lean, or just, trim the fat in your organization and put that saving onto the customer, whatever it can be. If it's creativity, design, it doesn't matter what it is. You've got to find a way that you can bring more value than the next person, and then just constantly stay out in front of that. But it's definitely a challenge for sure.
That's the first time I think I've heard of writing down. I guess it's not industry specific, but it's if you're serving to a customer, so if you're selling some sort of product, how can they come in and disrupt your? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of business owners out there listening. They're like, yeah, duh, we do that. But I like how you put that, and you're just getting out in front of and being proactive
Right.
I think a lot of people can be reactive instead of like, how can I get out in front of this, or how can I serve, get ahead of something that's coming.
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely requires some creativity and vision as well, because like
Yeah.
if, the more, just like with anything, the more specific and detailed that you can be in quantifying what that is. So don't just say like, oh, we got to be better at customer service. Like, what does that even mean? Right. So you got to, if you can't quantify it, if you can't measure it, then, that used to be my signature on my emails is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So like, otherwise, like if you're just running around and you're not using metrics and you're not using things that are quantifiable, then you're actually managing primarily through emotion, which is not consistent. It's going to be erratic. It's not scalable. So first off, you need to have a way of quantifying whatever is taking place. Customer satisfaction, net promoter score, delivery times, patient success, what percentage of our patients are healing versus this other, whatever it may be, whatever the standards are, you need to have the most accurate way of measuring those, identifying those, and then really trying to go out and beat your competition at those. And I think the people that are really successful in life, like it's not always the cheat code to happiness, because you go looking for bad stuff is more than looking for good stuff. But, I definitely think one of my keys to success was like, if we had a great day, definitely want to make sure that you pat people on the back and you celebrate those successes. But I definitely spent more time going and looking for what we did wrong and what we could get better at. And so you got to be careful, because that can burn people out. And I certainly did that. But just having this mantra of like, we can't let someone be better than us at X, and then putting like something quantifiable next to it, and not just being broad and generic and saying, oh, we got to have the best product, or we got to be the best at customer service. We got to have the best relationships. Like, no, put something next to that statistically that you can measure, and then go achieve something. So I don't know. That's it, like I said, it can be stressful to, but you're either, did or didn't, I like to be a did organization and not a didn't one.
Yeah. Well, I always say it's the difference between those that are good and those that are great, and above that are the ones that went out and did something, and the one that did. I mean, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people come to you with ideas, or like, I want to do, and how many of them actually did? Like, how many of you like, oh, I want to lose 10 pounds. Okay, but did you actually, like, what are you going to do that? Like, are you going to get up early? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do this? And a lot of people just leave out those steps along the way too. And I like them. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
I like this. I wrote that down. So as someone that was managing a team of people and, building your business, how did you coach yourself? I mean, you kind of touched on, and I do this with the podcast, like I launch an episode, what could I have done better? Like, I'm always asking people for feedback from your perspective. How did you manage that mentally for yourself and the people around you?
Just meaning like, where did I find the inspiration or motivation to
keep going, especially during, and something I touch on a lot of this podcast is like, so when you're having a failure, you touch on like making mistakes. So when you're getting to that point, and if you have an example, give one of like, this is a mistake that we made, and this is what I did after that to grow to this amount. And then also when you're managing a team, like, how do you guide people through that? I think a lot of people get stuck around like, oh, if I make this mistake, my world's going to end. When in reality, it's not always the case.
Yeah. I mean, I probably need someone to answer that for me. You're asking that in a unique week. Yesterday, it's the week. So I'm still in obviously a lot of different businesses, and I run a kind of a venture capital incubation deal where we fund startups and different deals. And this week is a good example because it started off terrible, just right out of the jump. Like the one project that I'm spending the most amount of time on right now, I think hopefully this is where just my emotional intelligence and experience is playing a part, because I definitely know I would have handled this differently 10 years ago. Short answer, 10 years ago, brute force. Like, my lawyer has a saying that, whatever card you have, like, that's what you have to play, right? And so he used to say that, like, lawyers, if you have, like, a really good fact, then, like, just lean on that fact, and bang on that fact. And, And then if you have a really good witness, then you bang on that witness, and you know, that's your strength. You lean on that witness. And he was like, and when you don't have anything, just bang on the table and be really loud. And I think about that all the time. It's like, you know, sometimes you're just banging on the table. You're like, I have no idea what's happening right now. But I try, hopefully, that's not really a thing anymore. Like, I don't have to do the whole fake it till you make it or any of that. I like yesterday, going back to that, is a really good example that the week started off really bad. And I think, like, then this was not a quick fix. Like, this is not something where it's like, oh, this is a bad Monday. It was like bad news about a project that was going to have like major setbacks to the business, and just, you know, it's a newer business, it's a startup, and so that can mean, okay, wow, we're going to burn through so much more capital than we had forecasted, and we've got this big chunk of clients that they're expecting this by a certain date. Now we're not maybe going to meet that, and so I think I would have gone into, like, you know, fight or flight mode and try to like figure out how to do all this stuff. And like I said, just brute force. Like 10 years ago, it would have been like pull all nighters, you know, do all this at no cost, like kill all the margin, but just find a way to survive. Like just find a way to tread water. I think, you know, just maybe age and wisdom, I don't know, something. I just said like, okay, let's just slow everything down. And like, you know, the week's probably going to get worse. So no one think that we're going to fix this today and that everything's just going to miraculously be all right. And also, let's not pile on. Like, let's not make it worse. Because I think, like, that's probably the way I would have handled it in the past, would have just been like, you know, just blowing people out. Just like, hey, nobody's going home. We're bringing food in. We're not leaving until this is done and fixed. And then, you know, and all you really did then was just rob Peter to pay Paul, because then the next week something else wasn't perfect. And so I think just being able to like have the experience of saying like, this is just going to happen. Like if you're involved in a business, I mean, it's fitting that we're here today. I mean, one of the richest people in the world is Mark Zuckerberg, and what they said, you know, he had like a significant drop, you know, on paper to his net worth yesterday, just all because of, you know, the lost ad revenue and this and that, and then the damage of the perception of the network, and, you know, whatever. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, 30 years old or 90 years old, trials and tribulations are going to happen. And so I think just, you know, when you're younger and you've got this like big, you know, rah-rah organization, maybe you can pull everybody in and pull all-nighters and go crazy. And for this particular business and where I'm at right now, where that group of people were, I think the best thing for us was just to get really, really organized and come up with a game plan, and then just try to make sure that all week long, like, hey, you know, you own this, you own this, you own this, and let's make sure that by Friday, like, we're in a better place, but it isn't going to be perfect. And then just sort of just, you know, providing a sense of calm and then leadership and just a game plan. So it's, you know, hopefully the end result is the same. Like, we're going to get both things accomplished and all of the issues resolved. But I definitely think, you know, 10 years ago, much more frantic, much more brute force. This one was probably a lot more, you know, just game planning and strategizing and delegating. And so, you know, I don't know. It's definitely, I think, anybody that would say like, oh yeah, I'm a master at, you know, crisis. You know, hopefully I never have to be a master at crisis, because that would mean like you've been involved in so many crises that you became a master of it. But, you know, I think it's just, it's almost like a boxing analogy. It's like, you know, if you're going to get into business, then whether you know it or not, you're getting into the game of problem solving. If you get into boxing, you're getting into the game of like getting hit in the face. So it's like, if you don't want to get hit in the face, don't get into boxing. If you don't want to solve problems, don't get into business.
I like that. And I saw something or heard something the other day that was talking about entrepreneurs and how he's like most of the difference between the ones that were really, really, really successful and those that just made it or maybe fell off was handling and managing stress. And I think something that you just touched on there was like mindset around, you know, 10 years ago, I would have been like, guys, you know, damage control, like this is what we need to do right here, right now to fix this issue. And then now it's like learning from your mistakes, learning from things that maybe didn't land back then, which also I think all great leaders have. I think it's hard, you know, if you're making the same mistakes that you made 12 years ago now, you're we're probably missing something in between there, like growth and not acknowledging or growing from the things that you regret.
Right. No, definitely. I don't feel like I'm old, right? But, there's an old saying that like energy is wasted on the youth. And it's so true because it's like you just want for 1 second to have like the energy to pull a 16-hour day, but to be able to do the 16-hour day with the mindset and the experience that you have now, right? I mean, back then it was like we had to work 16 hours because half of the day was probably mistakes. Now we don't make near as many mistakes, but nobody's working 16-hour days.
Yeah.
So, it's the mental part of it is huge though. I'm not scared to say it. I think the best move that ever happened to me and in my life, both like personally and professionally, was I learned that like, talking to someone, whether it's like a coach or, a therapist or just a really, really good friend, whatever it is, if you have a consistent outlet and someone that you can go to, I mean, my advice would be someone that's a true professional. If you had access to that, that would be, definitely my advice. Because I did that. I learned to do it before things would even go wrong, right? Because I think in a lot of cases, if you wait until you're in a really, really bad place or a really, just dark place, then putting yourself back together is going to be harder. And then obviously on the way down to that place, like you probably did more damage to the people around you. So, that is a weird area that baseball really did help me because I didn't grow up in the type of home or environment where like we were going to go talk to a therapist, like that was not part of the drill in Fort Worth at that time. But baseball we did. Like when I was with the Indians, like you'd have to go see the Cleveland Indians had an organizational psychologist, and you had to meet with this guy like on a weekly basis. And I was too immature to even know like how to use that. I mean, now I'd be like, oh my God, what a resource. I can't believe someone's like giving this to me. But I mean, like a Yale grad doctor that would sit there and talk to you about your life. And I'll never forget, like he would ask, it probably took me 20 years to really understand the point of the question, but he would say like bases are loaded, full count, bottom of the ninth. You take a step off the rubber for 1 second, take a big deep breath, and now you get yourself motivated, like to throw this pitch and get this out. What did you think about? And I was like, I don't know, like, and I remember like answering, and I said, my family, like my parents, like I want to go back and like I want all the days and hours throwing the baseball with my dad, like I want to throw this pitch to make my dad happy. And I was thinking I'm in like a no judgment situation where he's just like, there's no wrong answer. And he's like, like that's the wrong answer. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this was like, I thought I was in therapy. Like I didn't know I was getting judged like that.
True or false, okay?
Yeah, no, but he was like, no, that's the wrong answer. And I was like, okay, like I didn't know that was a thing. And he was like, well, no, you can't be in a situation like that and be thinking about external motivators. And I don't know if this is true or not. But as I've gone on in life, like later on, it definitely made a lot more sense to me because that's basically his point was it's very short lived. Like, well, what's going to happen when you've now been in that situation 50 times and you've already had a bunch of success or, you've made money or, you can't keep going. It's not healthy that every time you need to make something happen, you go to a dark place. I don't know if it's true or not. I watched the Michael Jordan documentary on ESPN, and he seemed like he liked to go to pretty dark places. So my psychologist could have been wrong. That could be a bad piece of advice. But I think in terms of business, certainly compared to sports, business is a longer life. No sport plays 365 days a year, 250 days a year, like you go to work or whatever. And so I think if every time you had to really get yourself motivated, you had to go to like a kind of a dark place or, like I'm going to do this in spite of this person or to make this person proud or I'm going to, it's, I think it is fleeting. I think you have to be more about like his point was all you should be thinking about is like your best pitch is a slider and you need to put that slider on his back right foot. And if you do that, then we win the game. Like take a deep breath and just think about executing that pitch. Like don't go anywhere else. Because otherwise now you're playing off of emotion, and emotion is it's gonna fail you. Like one day it's gonna work, next day it's not gonna work. He's like, all you need to think about in that moment is just relaxing, then executing what you need to do in that exact moment. Don't bring anything extra with it. So anyways, I do think it's a really good piece of advice, because I think oftentimes in life, it's like, if you're now bringing all this other stuff in, it's a problem. But back to the whole point of the story was I learned how to talk to a psychologist there. And he did tell us back then, like, hey, if you learn how to have a relationship with a professional like this, like, you'll go to someone your whole life even before things go wrong. And if you're talking to someone and you're in sequence and you've got this cadence with someone and you're talking to them all the time, you'll avoid ever getting to those really, really, really bad places. Because that person will start to pick up on trends, and you could say, like, okay, well, I reacted in a way that's not normal. What's going on? Well, maybe you're not sleeping enough. Maybe there's something that you're compartmentalizing that you're not addressing. Or, I think it just helps to go somewhere and have someone that you can talk to. And definitely as a business owner, it's a rewarding job. And the way our society has been set up, I know there's a lot of like judgment to people that are making too much money, and I don't
work hard, play hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a position on, like, if somebody says, "Oh, Elon Musk is worth too much money." I'm not smart enough to answer that. I don't know what is too much money and whose right is it to say that. I don't know anything about that. That's not for me to judge, I don't think, right now. But I do know that being a business owner is lonely, and I think that if you're doing it in a real genuine manner, and you appreciate the people that work for you, you don't ever want to be responsible for losing someone's job. And so, like, if you take that seriously, if you're like, okay, I'm going to be a provider for these people, I'm going to help try to put these people in a position to better their lives. And then, of course, as a byproduct of that, if those people are continuously making more money, you probably are as well, But I do know that there's a lot of drives home from work. You're driving home and you're just like, there's not really anyone else in your organization you can call. And you're just like, you're kind of on an island, and it's, so having some sort of professional outlet, someone that you can go to, that you can trust, that has maybe been there before or whatever, just, I think having somebody to talk to was definitely, helpful and beneficial. And, I had a lady that worked for me forever, and I attribute all of my success to her. Like, she was the head of HR, but she did so much more. She understood operations. She was sort of a Lean Six Sigma minded person, but really understood, just the human spirit. And she used to always tell me all the time that, like, without naming names, that we had people in our company that were oxygen givers and oxygen takers. And she's just like, hey, you spent too much time with the takers today. Like, you need to go around someone who's going to put some enthusiasm and energy and put something back into you. And I think, like, that obviously extends way beyond work. I mean, there's friends, we all hate to admit it, but there's someone in all of our families that, like, when their name flashes up, it's like you love them, but you're like, oh God, here we go. It's like, and then when that call is over, you're like, maybe you weren't even tired, but when that call is over, you're tired. So it's like you can only have so many of those people around you in a day. And I think it's good to identify the oxygen givers. Your oxygen, I think some of the people that put the most energy back into me and make me feel the best, they don't give two shits about business. Like, I just have friends that are just, they're just always present. They're not in this race of trying to be the best at something. Maybe they've got a particular skill set or trade that allows them to kind of look at life a little differently than I have. And we just get together and hang out, and it's like, they don't care. I could have had the most successful liquidity of intertrade. They don't care. They're not even going to ask. It doesn't come up, and then 4 hours go by and you feel like $1 million, because of the way they made you feel. So I just think you definitely need to have people in your life that, don't take things too seriously and can put energy back into you. So.
That was such a good. You almost made me cry at one part, Jacoby. You're an energy taker. If you're out there listening.
Oh no, Steve! Yeah, Steve, you're the best.
He's hilarious.
Yeah.
You touch on a lot. So the yoga teacher in me is like, I see and energy is definitely a real thing. You can feel it when you walk into a room and you know, like, this person's feeling judgment, or this person's doing this, or like, does this person actually believe in me and want me to be successful? And, as I've kind of taken this call it entrepreneur route with the podcast, like, you hear it a lot that it is lonely and like you don't have someone to turn to and you feel like there's a lot weighing on your shoulders. And it's crazy that the first thing that you said is finding an outlet, because I think there's a lot of people out there who A, would never admit to that, or B, be too scared to go that direction, because a lot of times it's an ego thing, like, oh, I don't want to go or ask for help. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not, especially when you're dealing with, for you have a family, you have kids, there's just so many external things. But the first thing I wanted to touch on, which I thought was really interesting, is the difference between an internal and external drive. And this is something that I've noticed personally. When I'm doing something to please something externally, it's not as successful or doesn't resonate as much. Right. So for you were doing baseball to please your parents. And I just did an episode with Lou, who is an Olympian, and he was talking about he recruits people. And he's like, the people that come and they don't love it, it's not their dream, they'll last a year or two. If it's their parents' dream or whatever it is externally, like, oh, I want to be a D1 athlete, whatever it is, versus the people that come on and it's like their dream and they believe it internally, they're the ones that you're seeing at the top. So for you, baseball seemed like it was more of an external drive. Was business more internal? Or kind of walk through that from your perspective?
Yeah, you bring up so many good questions. I don't even know that I have the answers to them. It's funny because as you were explaining that, I don't know how much you followed the NFL, but Steve, if he was here, he would know this story. But the NFL is infamous for when they're drafting guys, like, they love to ask, at least in the last like 10 years, they've loved to ask the question, like, how much does this person love football? And it'll become like a really big, like, buzz thing that people are talking about. They're like, oh my God, like, so and so tested off the charts, we love him, but he doesn't love football. And then all of a sudden you see that guy plummeting down draft boards. You see and hear it all the time. It happened with the kid here locally, Miles Garrett, because they said that he had a lot of interest. And I think he was pretty outspoken in the draft process and saying that he didn't plan on playing a really long time and that he had a lot of interest outside of football. And then people freaked out, and there's been a lot of guys do that. They almost start to take, if someone has all these other interests, or if someone's really, kind of a Renaissance man and like multifaceted different things, they start to turn that into reasons not to take this person. And, I think that's, Miles Garrett is so freakishly talented that he really may not. I do agree that if person A and person B are very equal in ability, and then, person A just wants it more, I'm going to bet on person A. Mm-hmm. But if person B is like head and shoulders way better, as long as they don't hate what they're doing, I think you really have to, you got to have some sort of equation there to value all those things equally. So, now having a colleague and someone that you work with every day and maybe talent is not quite as big a factor. You'd love to work with people that want to be there. You want to go to dinner with people that want to go to dinner with you. You want to, you want to spend time with people that feel the same way. And we've all been in situations where, maybe someone doesn't want it. And that's such a grind, either as a partner or as a manager, when you're working with someone and they truly don't want what you want. I mean, kind of like what we said earlier. I mean, you gotta get out of that yesterday. I don't know that I played baseball exactly from my parents. I wish you were asking the question. The wheels were spinning. I really don't know. I want to be great at everything. Like, I don't want to be great because I want to be better than you. That really, truly, I know that sounds convenient and it sounds like the right thing to say, but I really don't. Like, I never think like I want to be better than, it's not personal like that. Like, I don't want to be better than this person. I don't want to be better than that. I want to be the best of my ability. I want to know that, like, and maybe there's a little bit of ego in this, but I just want to know, like, everything I had, I gave it my all. And I do think that if I picked to go do that, I already summed it up, and I think it's something I should be good at. So if I'm saying, like, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to be the best, it's not that I'm going to be better than you. It's that may happen, but it's only because like I want to go do this and I'm going to go do whatever it takes to be successful at that. And I don't, and I don't claim that that's a good thing. I don't think that's like the recipe for a really happy life because, this sort of results performance oriented mindset is, that's you have to be wired to live your life that way or not. And if somebody's not wired that way, you're not gonna get them to see through that lens. So, and I've said it to so many friends of mine, like when talking about our kids and different things that to your point, I don't know if my dad was an athlete, played college football. I don't know if, definitely times were different back then. And I can remember some really just quiet, awkward ride homes, where I did not play well. And he was pissed, like furious. And I can remember like definitely not wanting to let him down. And
that's a natural reaction.
yeah, and just thinking like, I don't like losing. I don't like letting people down. I got to get better. And for me, it all worked. Like I whether life is a crazy simulator or this is just day to day, I don't know, but it all worked out for me the best way possible. I had the best parents for me and like what I needed, and it's worked out really, really well. I don't know if that's the best thing for everyone. I think if you did the exact same thing with me with someone else, that may have brought out the worst in that person. So, I think you just have to be, the internal, external motivating factors. I think all of us, there's a little bit of gray, so, but, I don't know if you saw the Michael Jordan documentary, but there's just an unbelievable scene where they tell the story about Michael Jordan, and he's kind of starting to reach the top of his career, and he goes out and he's got a game against a rookie, and this kid I think it was the Bullets, has like an amazing game, like one of the best games anyone's ever had against Jordan, and then Jordan tells people that on top of that this kid was like trash talking and said something, like walked by him and said something kind of crazy to him, and then he got himself, like they played the same team again the next night, and all night long he just kind of just kept bringing this back up, and you could just, like people were saying, you could just see him getting angrier and angrier, and then he told a reporter and then told his team like, hey, this kid scored 37 points on me and then trash talked me. I'm so mad and I'm so much better than him. I'm going to score the same number of points last night he scored in the game. I'm going to score that in the first half. And sure enough, I think the kid scored like 37 points, and at halftime Jordan had like 39 points. And then, but the craziest part about it was, it turns out that the whole story was fake. The kid was scared to death of Michael Jordan. He never said a word to him, never even made eye contact with him. But Jordan was just such a psycho about like needing to find something to want to like win at, that he just made that up and was like, okay, like I'm going to make sure this never happens again. And then just got himself angry and then went and did that. And, it's hilarious, Now, again, if you think about that, if you think about that and you now try to apply that to like a 40-year working career, that's going to be a tough person to work around every day. I think it goes back to like what our team psychologist said, that it's like more about, if this is your podcast, you want to make sure that, the details of your sound come through better and the topics are just right on point more. Like, just execute the details of your vision to go make this the best of what you can and the things that you have. Like, if you do that, then just focus on that. Like, you don't need to, like, right before the show airs, go to a really dark place. I don't know, maybe it works. But I feel like that stuff works really well in sports because you play like 18 games and 60 games, but it's like, think about like driving into work 250 days a year and then doing that for like 3 decades. It's like, okay, I can't get mad that much.
Yeah, that's true. And you touch on another thing too previously that was talking about like the way your brain is wired. And it's funny. I think there's a lot of people, and this is something that I've noticed about myself, is that I'm always trying to be better. And I think sometimes it's at a disadvantage because I'm, it sounds bad, but like you're never satisfied. Like, and I'm sure this is something you can attest to, is that like you hit something and I'm like, okay, what about more? What about more? And I know one of the guests that was on, he like opened a bunch of super successful edible arrangements franchises, and he was talking about like for him, like they'd hit a number, he's like, okay, well our next number is this, and it's just that like constant. I think it's from sports, I don't know what it is, but that's just how it was like raised and like how I am. And it's hard when you start getting kind of caught up in that like race mentally, and you're really beating yourself, like, and that's what it is. And that's how it is for me in the podcast. Like, I mean, there's so many good podcasts, but you're competing with yourself. I think at the end of the day, like the only person you're really truly beating is yourself. It's different, you know, if you're out there and you're an athlete, if you're playing basketball or someone that's 6'10" and you're 5'5", okay, obviously we're going to have a little bit of genetics that you can't control. So I thought that was interesting. And then another thing is emotion versus logic. And then we touch on a lot in this in business and kind of taking that back for you. And over the years, I'm sure maybe you started making decisions early on that were more based off of emotion, or you're a guy. I feel like guys are more logical. Kind of touch on that and how I think sometimes we respond to fear with emotion. So is that something that you catch yourself doing? Or if there's an example of a time that you reacted emotionally and the outcome was negative?
Every day. Every day. Every day. Right before we walked in. But to your first point though, you know, I definitely think that the more question is that's probably the one thing I have spent the most amount of time thinking about, because just real candidly, like everyone or most people do have like a number in their head where you're like, oh man, like, you know, whether you're joking with your friends, you're like, if you had blank, you know, what would you do, right? And then you kind of have this number, you were like, that's a number that, you know, I would never worry about money. And everybody's number is different and it's all their own right. But then if I've had 50 friends hit that number, I didn't have one friend stop. So you're exactly right. And I think, but what happens is you know, we think about things as if like they're binary and okay, this is this and that is that. And the reality is there is no neutral in business. So what happens is, like, if it's your, you know, the edible arrangements, right? What happened along the way is your friend realized, like, maybe 25 was the goal. We're going to get 25 stores. But he realized that stores are either growing and they're getting better and I'm gaining territories, or I'm losing them. There is no middle. And I don't know how to change that. That's the world that we live in. Yeah. Like, there is no neutral. Like, no one is just like, this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to stop at this. And then every single day, everything from employees and supply chain and inventory and real estate and like there's not one single day that everything is on autopilot. Like, every day there's something that, like, this wasn't a problem yesterday, but it's a problem today. And I didn't think this was going to be a problem tomorrow, but it's a huge problem tomorrow. Like, and so if you think like I'm going to get to that goal, you're acknowledging that I'm going to now start winding down, because you're either getting better and you're reinvesting in yourself and you're reinvesting in your business, or there really is no neutral.
Yeah.
There's no neutral. And I'm not here to defend like all of the richest people in the world, but I can promise you that in the first 5 years of Amazon, or the first 5 years of Tesla, or the first 5 years of Apple, or the first 5 years of Nike, I promise you those guys were not sitting around saying, I'm going to be the richest person on earth. I'm going to be worth $186 billion. I'm going to be worth $97 billion. I swear to you they weren't. Anyone that's saying that those guys were claiming, I'm going to be worth X, they don't understand the way business works. Now, does someone need to make that much money? Probably not. You know, is that a thing that's a little bit out of whack? Probably. But what happened is you got on that roller coaster, you know, and you take off, and then as you get good at something, it just, you know, it speeds up, and all of a sudden, like, you know, I'm not saying that along the way there's not intent. There certainly is. I mean, you're never going to be the biggest and the best at something or do $1 trillion in sales at something that you didn't have like crystal clear intentions of doing. But you earned the right to do that by providing something that people wanted. So if people weren't responding to this, they weren't looking for this, this wasn't a void that you were filling, you wouldn't even have the opportunity to be making that money, right? But you don't set out and say, "Oh, I'm doing nothing. I have nothing, but I'm going to be the richest person." Like, no, that's not logical. It's like going back to your point about logic and emotion and these things. Like that's, I think people set out to I want to be the best at this. I want to be. This doesn't exist. I want to create this, and then as that journey takes off, and you realize, well, I can't sit in neutral, and I don't want to go backwards. The only option left is to grow, and then the ones that grow really, the fastest and the biggest, we talk about them and we read about them because that's what happens. I mean, somebody's going to make that money. Someone has to be the richest person in the world. There could be 4 or 5 that are right there together, or there could be one that's way more than the next. But over the span of our lives, that person is going to change 10 times, 15 times, and that person is a byproduct of they did something at the right time with the most amount of volume and repetition and velocity, and people wanted it. And we could bitch about it, but people are, I bet 2/3 of the people that bitching about Jeff Bezos still use Amazon. So it's like, you're in control of that. Stop doing it,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do hate that there isn't a neutral. I wish there was an easier way. I do. Obviously, I didn't grow up in the 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s, but like, I feel like it was easier to have a small business or a family lifestyle business in that era than now. I think, I always tell people now that the runway, the uninterrupted runway that you have to go run a business is shorter than it used to be. Like think back on like the 80s and the 90s, if somebody had a product or something that was successful, I think like you may have 8-9 years of just kind of being in your own lane and doing your own thing. And anyone that's attended trade shows and different conventions has seen how quick things get knocked off. So like, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. I invest in healthcare. I invest in we've done some stuff in auto. Like I said, technology, food and beverage. Food and beverage is a great example. If you go to Expo West, and it's like one of the biggest food and beverage conventions in the world, and someone has like a massively hit booth, like their booth's going crazy and everyone can see that there's a lot of activity and they're writing orders, mark my words, by the time that the next show cycles through, whether it was the way their booth was set up or the color scheme they were using or how they switched the packaging, everybody's now incorporated something into it. And I mean, and the ability to not just like see it and be aware of it, but now like the access to resources to now go pull that off and mimic it. It's hard to own anything these days because, like I own a chain of sneaker stores called Center, and it's Center, like we'll go to trade shows in Vegas or different fashion shows. And it used to be that like if someone came out with this one particular silhouette or style or whatever, then like you just knew like, oh, that's so-and-so, like they made that, that's their deal. And now things get knocked off so fast, like unless you're really in like the weeds of the industry, by the time things like really hit the consumer market, people don't really know what was the origination of that, because people have knocked it off so fast that like no one ever even really got their 10 seconds of fame to like say like, oh, I did that. That was my thing. It's like, so I tell people all the time, the runway for you to just like, I got a good idea, I'm going to go execute this, and then I should be good for a while. Like that good for a while is not a while. It's, you're going to have to just keep reinventing yourself and staying on top of it. And, so.
Yeah. Well, it's pivoting. I think we have so much access to, and I think social media had a lot to do with it. You see people that launch these things and it's like everyone is going after that just because they see the market, they see the opportunity.
Right.
And I think you hear people like you, even with podcasts, saying like there's so many podcast outs now, and it's just because we have access to it, and it's not as hard to go out and do it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not like you need $100,000 and this whole grand idea and blah, blah, blah to create something and get access to information now. now more than we ever have. I mean, I say it all the time. It's like content overload. Like you hear so many stories. Everyone's out there saying something or sharing or whatever it is. And it's easy to mimic something, put your quote unquote spin on it and sell it. And you might.
I think that's what's cool about podcasts, though, because I had a business mentor tell me a long time ago that, if someone's ever going to write you a massive, 7, 8, 9-figure check for whatever it is you're doing, that your growth, your revenue, whatever those, EBITDA, whatever it may be, those are the things that are going to get a buyer in the room, right? So if you don't have a certain number of, headsets or Spotify subscribers or, just you're not moving enough volume, then like no one's even coming in the room, right? But if you get to the point that your EBITDA is strong enough, your growth is strong enough, what really actually then gets the deal closed and like has someone sign the check or hit enter on the wire is how defensible your business is. So it's like, the growth gets them in the room, but how well you can defend your space is what gets people to actually write the check and pay for the business. And I think that's something that people oftentimes they overlook. Like, yeah, I got this to a certain point, but how well can you defend it, right? Like you're building your castle. Your podcast is your castle. Now you've got to build a moat around the castle to make sure there's certain elements of what you're doing that are defensible and people can't now just jump in there. I think that's what's cool about podcasts is it's like if this podcast is just you, it's just you being you, well, like, who can defend that better than you? It's like, you are you. Like, no one can be you, And that's what I admire. I love listening to Joe Rogan. It's like, I mean, he's crazy consistent because he's just being him, And it's like, if you like the show, then you like him. And so, that's the easiest thing to defend in the world is just going in and just being yourself and making sure that you've got the right content, you're talking about the right things, and you're still relevant, and that the right guests want to go on the show. But business like that, that's it's shockingly you would think that something like a podcast may not be very defensible, and then I think it actually really is. I think it's the more that you put your heart and soul into it, like someone else can't just come take that from you. Yeah. So I think consumer products. It's like we all now see the same stuff, whether we want to or not. It's like our phones are definitely listening. And it's like, you just see like, here, this thing emerged. We all saw it, and then whatever. Then it's like, the quicker it rises, the quicker, it starts to go away. And I think with consumer products, like whether it's, Alibaba or Amazon or things like that, it's frustratingly easy for someone. If you and I wanted to start a microphone company in 1980, it may take us 2 years to like figure out who's going to make a microphone that sounds the way we want it to sound and that can engrave our initials onto the bottom. We may spend 2 years trying to find that. And if we end this podcast right now, in 20 minutes, I can have some ordered that are custom-made microphones for us. It's and then a packaging company to package them, and then maybe even potentially somebody to market them and distribute them. And it's I think that's the part that it's like it's easier than ever to get into something. It's harder than ever to own it and defend it.
And just because there's a lot of saturation, I think with the there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of people that are wanting to go into that direction, or just, I also think too, it's easier for people to be like, okay, this person had a lot of success in this vertical. Like I'm going to try to go in it and put a little bit of a spin and see if it's going to take off in a different direction.
For sure.
They're not revolutionizing the industry. They're just like, oh, Nick had so much success making shirts. I'm going to do this a little bit different, find a different supplier, and boom.
I think the dirty little secret is and I hate to put people on blast, but like all the grimy industry of people that only look at search, right? So they're looking at just every day they've got bots that are just pulling down like the things that are trending. I read an article a few months ago that said that the number one most search trend in women's fashion were like low-rise jeans. And so like people are like, oh, low-rise jeans are coming back. But I mean, like there's literally agencies that all they do are spot like search trends. And then they even know beyond the search trends, they know which ones are sort of anomalies and then which ones can be turned into product trends and then how to read between the lines. Like, it's almost like, I hate to use another baseball analogy, but it's like, the Billy Bean Moneyball of like, hey, I'm not really going to look at players in their uniform. I'm going to read a stat sheet, and I'm going to get to know a player by the metrics first. Like, people are now getting to do business like that.
Yeah.
Like, they're saying like, oh, I have access to all these different things, lipsticks, tablecloths, whatever. Let me now go look and put together this algorithm that tells me like where the search history is going, and then create a product off of that, which, it is what it is. I don't, it's not a good look to just rip anybody like making money and having success. It comes across like you're being a hater, but it just doesn't feel very authentic and genuine. And I think, people like you and me, I would love to have authenticity out of the products that I'm buying, and know that the person that made them like really, cared a lot about what they did and what went into it. And unfortunately, as a consumer, things can disguise themselves a lot. Like, you don't always know which product and which brand does it mean more to that owner, and which one was sort of more, handcrafted versus manufactured by an algorithm looking at search history.
Yeah, and I always say that too, because it's kind of like, and I'm sure this is something that you can touch on with your t-shirt company, like when you really genuinely care about something and you're passionate about something, you can just tell, like, when you love something and you're not doing it for the money. It's like the bots you're putting together a business. A lot of people are like, how can I make $1 million overnight? Or how can I do this? Versus people that genuinely really care and are passionate about something. They're like, even if I don't make money, I mean, that's how it is with the podcast. It's like, I'm not making a profit off, a very huge profit off of it. It's like, but I'm still doing it because it's something that I love to do. And eventually I would love to go that direction. But it's like when you love something, you can just care and like tell. And I think social media is where we lose a lot of that authenticity. I think it's easy for people to just get caught up in like either lose sight of who they are, or I want to be like this person, or whatever it is.
Right.
I could go on a tangent about that.
No, I agree. And I think, social media in general has kind of forced us all into, I'm guilty of it. I do way more corny stuff on social media than I'd like to admit. And sometimes I'm like, why did I even do that? But you see so many people doing it that it's like subconsciously you're like, okay, well, let me, follow along and do it too. But yeah, I mean, we've definitely, I think if there's one silver lining to the pandemic, I know that, unfortunately, I think the more that things do sort of creep back to normal, the things that, I didn't miss are starting to come back into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I know that, barring when people were around us were sick or something was going on or whatever, I found that, most of like when we were truly like in quarantine, like that was probably one of the happiest times of my life. Because if you're a sicko like me and you just go, and you're always about what's next, and, you're challenging yourself to be the best. It was like, that was the first time in our lives, like, there was nothing to say no to. There was no pressure to be in this place. Like it was probably the only 4 or 5 months span in my entire life that, I actually gave myself a little bit of a reprieve and like, just like gave myself a break, and, wasn't judging myself every day on how much did I get done, and did I check off everything on my to-do list, and did I do it to the best of my ability? Like it was like, we're all kind of in this thing together, and everybody's in a different place. I definitely feel like I'm back to like where things were, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Just from a pressure perspective of just like, like what I want to see myself get done. So I think, it's good to check in every now and then, and just like, to your point, just remind yourself like of why you're doing something, and then just I don't remember where I heard someone say this, but I'm sure it came from some coach or something somewhere. But that you have to remind yourself the want to jobs versus the have to jobs. And all my jobs are want to, so it's like all the stress, and I mean, it's like if I really get all the curtains back and then get all the way behind it, you're like, I'm choosing to do all this. Like I want to do these things. So it's maybe stress. You may get yourself into some situations that are uncomfortable, and you don't want to misguide anyone from a leadership perspective. But all the jobs I have are want to jobs. So when you're a single parent and you're trying to put on for multiple kids, and help other people and do all these things. Like maybe you're not getting to pick, and do all the jobs that you want to do. You have to do this job because I've got to get through March and I got to make it through April. And then I have to, I think we just really have to remind ourselves of like want two problems versus have two problems. And then just sort of just keep that in balance. Because as drivers, as people that want a lot out of life, if you don't keep some perspective, I think you'll become a really unlikable person, because the people around you are aware, like,
Yeah.
she's in a really good spot. She's got a dream job. She's done all these things. Like, you have most of the things that people want in life, but yet, you don't really come across like a person who's necessarily always gracious. I know that's what I don't want to be.
Yeah.
Like I want to make sure people do understand first and foremost, like I feel like I've been really lucky and really blessed. And I've, had so many people that looked out for me when they didn't have to. And I'm a byproduct of all those things. But if you see me grinding and stressing about something, I'm not done. I want to keep going, but don't get it twisted. Like I'm super appreciative and very lucky. And, I'm not trying to, win any contest. I just, there's still things that I think we could go achieve and I want to go try to do those. But, at the end of the day, like I'm at peace with all this.
It's a balance. I mean, it's something that my mom has this conversation with me all the time. I've always overworked myself. You seem like you're the exact same person. And it's hard. She's like, you put all of this on yourself. Like you self-inflict all of the work that you're doing. You choose to teach yoga. You choose to have a podcast. You choose to have a job that's rigorous. Like this is all things. So you can't, not that she's like, you can't sit here and complain, but she's like, you put all of this on yourself. And I came to that conclusion last week. It was and I'm like, I'm so grateful for everything that I've had. And even though I'm nowhere close to where I want to be, I have to. And that was my daily reminder today of like, just take a step back. Like you're where you're supposed to be. Be grateful for everything you've had. There's so much of life left to live. But I think if you're always focused on like, what's next? Or I'm not here. Or for me, it's like I had hit 6 figures by the time I'm 25. Like, and is life going to end if you don't hit that? No. But I sometimes get so hard on myself that it's,
well, or you just have to remind yourself that a great quote is that comparison is the thief of joy. And it's, whether you know it or you're not, by using numbers like that and saying things like that, somewhere you're probably comparing yourself to something, something else, a prior expectation or vision you had. And it's like, just don't compare, I mean, it's tough not to. It's really hard not to. But I do really try my hardest not to ever think about myself in the context of like what someone else is doing, or I had a lot of friends that went on and had unbelievable baseball careers, and I swear to God there wasn't one time that I thought like bitter or why not me. It was why not me, like because they were better than me. And I got a funny story that when I was playing baseball, if somebody was like a big Ohio fan or baseball fan, that if you grow up in Texas, like you have an ego, right? You think like sports wise, you're insulated. You think like if I'm a Texas high school football player and I'm really good here, then I'm just really good everywhere because there's no one better than us. So it's like, and you think about that with baseball and everything else. So I go off to play, minor league baseball, and I'm overly confident, right? Because I'm like, I've traveled, I've played in all these tournaments. I'm a left-handed pitcher, whatever. And I'll never forget, like I had called my dad. I got there, and our first round pick was a guy who's now a Hall of Famer, one of the winningest pitchers, highest paid pitcher in baseball history, CC Sabathia. And CC and I, we'd played together and we were friends, but we played the same position. And the difference is he's like, 6'7". I'm barely maybe 6'1.5", 6'1". He's 290 pounds. I'm 200 pounds, and he throws 10 miles an hour harder than me. And I called my dad that night, and the internet was not what it is now. You couldn't just like research and watch film on guys like you can now. And I called my dad, and he was like, "How's it going?" I was like, "It's terrible. Like, it's so bad." And he was like, "Oh, you're being dramatic. Like, you need to toughen up. You're just overwhelmed." I was like, "No, my teammate is like 7 feet tall and throws 102 miles an hour." And he was like, "You're just making shit up. There's no way that's possible." And so I don't remember. A couple of weeks later, he was like, "I'm flying out to see you." I was in North Carolina. He's like, "I'm flying out to see you." And he flies out. And then like the night that he got there, I think like CC was pitching or something. And I wasn't playing. I'm a pitcher too. And so that was my night off. And then the game ends, and I'm still in like street clothes or whatever, but I go meet my dad, and he's like, "Yeah, you got a problem." He's like, "You really should think about going back to school." And I was like, I just didn't. I thought he was gonna be like, "Oh, he's good, but you're just as good." 20 years of my life, my dad was like, "Oh, he's really good. He's a good player, but you do your own thing, and you're good too." And it was the first time he was like, "Oh, you got a problem."
You're like, thanks for the encouragement.
He was like, "You need to get traded." But then I ended up playing with like multiple guys that were kind of like that, and I realized like, oh no, there's just a lot of guys better than me. Like it just is what it is. So I'm definitely. I think I say I didn't have a business plan when I started my first business. I think I had 3 or 4 years of riding buses, realizing that like that was going to end. So it was like I was like quietly starting to build like ideas in my head because I knew that wasn't going to last forever.
Oh, well, I'm over here laughing. It is. I mean, I also think too, when you look back, I think when you're always at the top or you're always winning, you're always this, it's hard to have a different perspective. Like, you know what I mean? But when you're not the best, and that was when you were like, hey, it's time for me to move on and go do something else. I think it comes at those times in your life. You're like, this served me for a period of time. I was really good. It got me to the place, but now it's time for me to pivot. And I mean, I know it's hard to sometimes admit that, like, okay, maybe it's time for me to leave this or do this. 90% of the time, it's an ego thing. I deal with this all the time. But
for sure. No, I mean, I think, if there's one thing that we should all learn, just I know me every day is just while you are in a situation, I know that like we talk about being present, as if like, just being respectful to someone else, and when you and I are doing this, don't be doing this, and try to be as emotionally and like mentally present with someone as you can. I also think there's something too, just in general right now. Like I read a study today that, basically it was like I think the Harvard Business Review was saying that people are planning on staying at their jobs shorter duration than history, and we've known that, but it's important to understand it's never going to go back. Like I think a lot of people that own businesses or that are CEOs of companies or investors or whatever, you've thought like, okay, this is a trend that's going on. Like this, people, my grandfather had 2 jobs in his whole life. My other grandfather had 1 job his whole life, right? And then like, maybe my dad had 3 and my mom had 3. Well, now our generation is going to have 9, 10, 12. I think some people thought for a while that would be a trend that reversed. It's not going to, and I think people are realizing now like, hey, it's, this is not a bad person or this is not a bad employee if this person is going to move around and do 4 or 5 different things in their career. Whereas like, I was growing up with like, hey, if somebody's changing jobs every 4 or 5 years, like they're flaky. There's something wrong with them.
You hear that a lot.
I think we have to understand like, this is not changing. And so therefore we have to put people in a position almost immediately to be successful. And then I think B, it is important for the people that are doing the jobs and planning on leaving, that just because you're planning on leaving doesn't give you the right to do a really bad job, And I think that like, unfortunately there's times that like you emotionally check out, and then because you emotionally check out and you think that that's not your future, that may give you the right to kind of just say, screw it, and then mail it in. And I think like, I hope that that's something that we as a society evolve past. Like things don't have to be so feast or famine. You don't have to be like all in and saying, I'll give you my whole life and I'll work here forever or whatever. But it also doesn't have to be where, I want to get on the PA in Walmart and, scream at everyone and tell them how bad the job is either. I hope things do land somewhere in the middle where people feel the freedom and the empowerment to go pursue the jobs they want to faster than our parents did, but they do it with enough pride that they don't burn bridges on the way out. Because I mean, I knew baseball was over, and I literally threw every pitch like it was my last. Like I was like, okay, the odds of me having a Hall of Fame career towards the end of my career was slim to none that it was going to miraculously turn around. I was going to go be an all-star. I definitely still try to be the best teammate and just the best friend. And when I did play, I tried to bust my ass and do really well. So it's like, I think, hopefully because I've got friends that are like, oh, I hate my job. Wait till I leave. I'm gonna, this is really not a, it's not a, the people that get screwed when you do things like that are the customers. It's like
or
you may be trying, or exactly. Most
Like-
importantly, probably you're screwing yourself over because that
for sure.
your reputation is going to follow you around. But I that's one of the things. I have a startup right now that is sort of trying to address some of those things. But there's hundreds of videos that have gone viral with people like trying to top each other on the craziest way to like quit and exit their job. And I hate that those are getting like
attention,
that much attention and like that many retweets and shares and likes. And, there was a video we saw at the office the other day that had like, I don't even know, like 15 million views. And it was someone like quitting their way and like quitting their job in this really crazy, crazy way. And I'm just like, it sucks that person got to the point that they felt like that.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't have to be that way. But ultimately, like, I think that person will look back and be like, okay, like I'm sort of embarrassed that, I'm now known for that. Right. Because I mean, let's face it, like whether I agreed or disagreed, I'm not going to be super comfortable hiring that person. Now that person comes as a new employee working for me and everyone that works there is like, oh, look how they quit their last job. Like, I think people just need to have a little bit more, presence of mind when they do things that, the stuff that we do will probably show back up again now.
Yeah, Steve talked about that, and that's my dad. He's been in sales his whole life, had a lot of success, and he's always like, Erin, the person you piss off now is going to be your next boss. Treat every single person like that. And I've taken that to heart, and and it goes back to kind of a themes that we talked about of like dealing emotional versus logic. And I always tell people, and I give advice to people at work, I'm like, if you're frustrated with someone, sleep on it. Like I always give myself 24 hours after I've had an argument or anything, because I'm like, I'm responding emotionally, I'm saying something that I don't mean, or whatever it is. I'll have a conversation with you tomorrow or whenever it is. If someone's sending me an email, I don't know what happened in your day, but I'm just not going to acknowledge that. Because
so are you good at that?
I am, but that's just I do a lot of meditation,
That's
like
awesome.
practice and stuff like that.
Do you feel like sometimes, like, let's just be real, that you don't say things that you would have meant? That's why I say them.
Oh, I do, but I'm also just very sometimes direct, and people take it the wrong way. So like,
Right.
if someone's like making me angry, sometimes I'll just be like, you're really frustrating me right now, but I'm not going to go into this. We can have a conversation tomorrow, and then.
Yeah.
It's not to say I've never said something mean.
No,
Once you get to know me.
Yeah. No,
It's just a good rule of thumb.
Oh, for sure. I don't do it though. I don't do it. Like, there's the high
You're
road.
like, F you.
There's the high road and the low road, and I very, very seldomly take the high road. And mainly because like I don't get mad often. So if I got really,
you don't seem like you're.
Well, no. If I got really mad, it's because something. I mean, listen. Have I been wrong? Of course, 100%. Have I overreacted? Or, of course. But for the most part, like I'm rooting for everyone. Like, I've just like anyone. I've been like burnt. I've had some like people do some crazy stuff because it's like I'm generous. I want to. I'm probably one of the quickest people to come to about like wanting to get a deal done and betting, because I meet people that remind me of myself a lot, and I'm like, I wasn't a person that was bankable. And that ended up working out to my benefit, because I tried to go raise money when I did my first startup, and people were just like, I don't really understand it. I don't know if that's a market. Like, I don't necessarily think. A great example is just, I'll make it short, but I did have a guy who I went to who I thought I really looked up to. He was maybe 8 or 9 years older than me, really successful business guy. I went to him when I was starting my first business. So like I buy that equipment, the business starts going well. And then as anyone who's started a company knows that like, when growth happens, I mean, you may need capital faster if your business grows really quick than if it shrinks really quick. I mean, you always think you're going to have to raise money fast if you're not growing, but if you grow really quick, now you really need money. So I was growing really quickly. So I went to this guy that I thought like 100%, he loves me, he's going to back me. And he said something really crazy and like really rude, and was like, I love you as a person. Like, he's like, oh, like I'm, like, oh, that's so cute, or like I'm, like basically was like, dude, like, yeah, I love you. Like, I love you as a person. I think you're super fun. I don't think you're going to be a great business guy. And I was just like, wow, like, and it was almost like he had me labeled as like a certain type of person. And then, I was like, okay, well, I don't know whatever leads you to believe that like I'm only that, right? But But he was really, really rude about how he said no. And then, kind of going back to the Michael Jordan thing, I definitely did use that as motivation. Now, I didn't think about it every day, but I remember being like,
oh, for sure.
I remember like I'm the type of person that like we're not friends anymore, right? Because you could have just said no, like it's not a good time for me. I got some stuff going on that I've got to get sorted out or whatever. But he used that as an opportunity to kind of say like, oh, you're a fun dude. I don't think you're going to be a very good business. It's like
condescending.
When I say there's the high road and the low, I would never go do something like that to someone. But then the moment that he did do that, and then like we'd bump into each other and he'd be like, hey man, where you been? I'm like, we're not friends. Like you don't say something like I'm not the type of person like you're not gonna say that and then like we're gonna go play tennis or like watch a movie. Like, no, like we're like you said that and now we're not friends anymore. And I'm gonna carry that with me for life. Like I mean, like unless you came to me and said like I didn't mean it, which he obviously meant it. It was like definitely not a forced comment. So I'm just like, we're not cool. So long story short, hopefully this person does not listen. Pray this person does not listen. I don't really care, honestly. What do I care? So,
look at you now. If this is, it goes back to like, I mean, the Michael Jordan thing, but when people say you can't do something, there's nothing more than when someone's like,
for sure.
You starting a podcast is so dumb. I'm like,
yeah, what right do you have to go
catch
do
me
that?
in 5 years and you know who's
sure.
going to be laughing? It's going to be you.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm going to leave.
100%. So, but then, well, when you reach the top, just don't do what I did, because I was fast forward like 10 years later, 11 years later, business has crazy success. Our family's benefited like really, a ton from this. And I'm in a hotel room and I'm for a work deal and I'm looking through an email and I'm trying to find someone that we're doing a deal with or whatever. And just coincidentally, this person has the same last name. I haven't thought about this person in like 8 or 9 years, but I searched the last name in my email inbox because I'm just like trying to shortcut to find this one message. Well, up popped the message where I had originally introduced back in like 2007. I had originally proposed this business idea to this one guy who shit all over it. So I write this email and I got really emotional because this is 10 years later, right? So whatever. At the time I wrote the email, I'm like 27 and now I'm rereading it at 37. And I was like such a just sincere, like, heartfelt kid. And I was like, I got this idea. And like, I was so green. I was so naive. I definitely can see why you would say no. Cause like, I was so overzealous and just like all energy and just like, if you read it and you're kind of a cerebral person, you would think like this person seems dreamy and like they don't seem like the type that's going to go be successful or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I read it and then now like the older, wiser, now sort of rich me is like, okay, like I'm going to respond 10 years later because he destroyed me in his response and was like, hey, we'll meet. Basically he's like, hey, we'll meet in person or whatever. But like, I love you as a dude. You're not a good business person. Like you don't know what you're doing. Like you don't know anything about the industry, blah, blah, blah. And like, just really, really just let me have it for no reason, And I wasn't like out aggressively raising money. Like I wasn't asking the whole town for money. Like I think I asked one person and it was him and it went so bad. I never tried to raise money again. And it worked out to my benefit because I didn't have debt. I didn't go out and have 40 investors that, so it like really worked out perfectly for me. But that night, I think I'd probably had maybe a little bit too much to drink and I got emotional reading my own email and just blasted him. I wrote one of the, whatever he did and like on a scale of 1 to 10 on meanness, I doubled him and wrote it back. And then I grabbed all these press clippings of like the business sale and how much it had done. And I went back and was like reading him the proposal and like the deal would have made him like, I don't even know, like $40 million. Like I literally went back and did the math and told him what he missed and what a dumbass he was. And then I heard that he wasn't doing as well anymore. And then after reading that email, it's like not a surprise to me, like that you're doing terrible. And then it goes, but then like,
I love your energy.
Dallas Fort Worth is like still sort of small. So then like by the time I got home the next day, he had shown it to his wife. And then she had shown it to a friend, and then it had made its way back to my wife. And my wife's like, why do you always have to take the low road? Like, everyone knows that it went well. You did great. Just how do you do that? She didn't understand. Like, she thought like I just drank and then went and like, I'm going to go, I was like, I found the email and I was not looking for him. They have the same last name, whatever. And she was like, either way, like, you're like the only person I know that would do that. And I was like, you're right. I'm sorry. But I'm like, I don't take it back. Even sitting here now, like, I think I'd send it again.
Payback. I mean, it's giving. So, and now you're giving people the opportunity. But also, I mean, I guess we're looking at this podcast. Looking at it, is that part? Did that situation mold to you and where you are now with investing in startups and giving people the opportunity? Is that stemmed from that, or do you attribute? Like,
I mean, to be fair, I think I'm not joking. Like, if someone wrote me the email that I wrote him, I probably wouldn't do that deal. Just truthfully, I really would, but I wouldn't have gone in on him and said like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. And I think I would have just, I would have.
But he knew you as a person. I think that sometimes almost hurts worse because it's like, you know me as a person. And I think when someone knows you personally, like someone that knew me personally and actually knew who I was and said no, that to me would hurt harder because they know how driven I am and like know how much I want something versus if I randomly cold email on something like I do at work, they don't know me unless it's crafted with all these, measures. Obviously, you know what I mean? So at that point, like.
No, it definitely, being too close with someone or being friends with someone or having history, like that can backfire for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, but as long as there's not something in that person's background that's just like a really big red flag, I would definitely rather fund a deal with someone that I know, like, I mean, I think just human nature. If I could have someone around me, like, I really mean it. I think there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people that like want people to they have no ceiling on how well you want other people to do. And then there's people that want other people to do well, just not as well as them. Like, I'm not that person. Like, I have there's no ceiling on how well I want someone to go do. So if I had a really close friend of mine have an idea and he wanted me to invest, and you look at the terms of the deal and he stands to make way more than me, like, I don't care. Like, that's his, that if this is his deal and he needs some capital to get it going and I can assist him with that, then by all means, like, I'm not gonna, as my friends would call it, I'm not gonna pocket watch like that. Like, I'm not gonna count your money, and that's not my business. But I think there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that are out there that are like, I want you to do well. But the moment they hear someone did better than them, it's like their true colors really come out. You find out, like, okay, you're one of those, like,
oxygen takers. We're going to.
That person would definitely fall into. And sometimes you don't know. There's like there's like oxygen, like, thieves. They're like real sneaky about how they take it. Like, you have a friend who you think your whole life's like rooting for you, and and then it doesn't, like, you always think, like, there's all these corny sayings about you find out who your true people are when, like, you're at rock bottom. I think you find out who your true people are when you're at the top, because that's when you find out, like, somebody, you're like, wow, like, I thought this person would be really happy for me. And then they can't fake it. Like, they're so miserable that you're doing well that it's like they can't even hide it. And sadly, if every person in the world could taste some success, you'd flush out like a rat in your own little crew that you were like, wow, like, Mom, like, I didn't know you didn't want me to be successful, Mom. Like, there's like someone that you can't believe it that is not happy for you.
Yeah, that's something that I've been dealing with a lot recently, is just, and it's hard because, again, like, the people don't see your vision, but it just kind of goes back to, and like, I'm big on like who you surround yourself with, like, you're your 5 closest friends and all that type of stuff. But I mean, it's the people that are there for you at your lowest. But I do think too, people that aren't humble enough to look at someone else and when they've had success and be like, I'm so glad that they got there, and learn from them. Like, that's half the reason I started this podcast. I'm like, I've had the opportunity to meet so many cool people like you who have such good stories, and you're what motivate me and what keep me going. Like, I learn and grow from you. You having success is not dependent on my success. Like, there's no correlation. And I think so much that we're all pitted against one another, and we're all like, oh, well, if this podcast is successful, then mine can't. That's just not it. No. People tell me that all the time. They're like, you're entering a saturated market. No one else is me. And it's not in a cocky way, but it's like when you're going into something, you can't have this competitive nature. It's just Life is too short to always.
Right. Well, and like you said earlier, if you are gonna compete, like have your own set of internal standards when you're competing against those.
Exactly.
So it's X number of quality guests, X number of like quality minutes. It's these questions getting answered in a great way. It's the lighting, the studio, the sound, like everything. It's like just compete with yourself on those fronts, but then really block out like all of that external, this is who's doing what when that there's no point, So going back to the whole baseball thing, there's a line they would use all the time about like the most successful people in the world are realistic self-evaluators. So it's just, you really have to be very honest with yourself about what your strengths and weaknesses are and,
self-awareness.
Just self-awareness in general, So I just while we're on the topic of business and people love to ask the question about like what traits or characteristics do you see most commonly in successful people? And I think the one that gets overlooked the most is like I always say like, it's a mix between curiosity and resiliency, or curiosity and perseverance. Those two things, if someone is like incredibly curious and then also ridiculously persistent, that person's probably going to go on and be really successful in life. So if there's somebody that like I graduated with that's, high school, college, whatever, and they're listening to this right now, and they're like, oh my God, like he slept through half a class and like he got straight C's, or which would definitely happen, like my wife was at doing some Pilates bar here in Dallas, and she was walking out of class one day, and this girl was like, "Oh, do you know Nick Sunderman?" She was like, "Yeah, that's my husband." And she was like, "Oh my God, that's crazy." She was like, "He was such a dumbass in high school." And my wife was like, "Oh my God, like I can't believe how blunt she was." But she's just that type of person. But my wife was like, "Well, he's still a dumbass," like nothing's changed. But I think that if anyone was to play it back, though, I was incredibly curious, right? Now, I maybe wasn't the most curious about this chemistry project, but unfortunately, people like me sort of were really bad in hypotheticals and then really good when it matters. And school doesn't always tell that story, right? And so, like, I regret it. I definitely wish, like, if I had a redo in life, I would definitely take school more seriously. Because that was almost like your podcast. Like if someone wants to dismiss this, they can. If they really want to like listen to it deeply and take it to heart, there's a lot of stuff that they could probably apply to their life and have some success with. School is no different. It's a resource and it's what you get out of it. And I was not mature enough to get what I needed out of it. But for someone to say like, oh, I was a dumbass and they didn't see this coming, really weren't paying attention, because I was very resilient. I worked my ass off. I busted my ass in sports. I when I did engage in something, you would see that I could take it really serious. And I was really curious. Like I did ask questions, and I was always sort of exploring. And, my parents would always tell stories about like, you'd always find like the most interesting person in the room. And then you'd pick out that person, and then you'd pick their brain on stuff and ask pretty unusual questions. And so I just think in general, someone who wants to learn and wants to evolve and is open-minded and never willing to settle, but then you have the ability to like snap on some focus and then just get like really resilient and persistent about just going after this one goal, and then now sprinkle in the curiosity again. Now go be persevere, and then a little bit of curiosity. Like those are the things that I think really, all the famous people that we discussed earlier, the Steve Jobs and even sports people, right? I mean, like a Nick Saban, right? I mean, he's reinvented himself probably 6 or 7 different times. There's certain things certain principles that he's very committed to, and if you saw his team in 1999, you'd see some things that you still see now. But then there's massive evolutions and growth and changes into the way like he looks at a program and success. And I think that, those are the two things that I would just tell people. I would say like, try to find a way to tap into your curiosities and like wanting to learn and wanting to grow and evolve. But then like, if you don't have the proper amount of tenacity and like fortitude, then your curiosity is just going to lead you to like flakiness. And if you're just tenacious and you're not curious, you'll just be like closed-minded and bullish in situations. So it's like you just have to be like, really, really tough and have resolve, and then just always wanting to learn more.
Yeah, you're so many things. Self-aware. I'm big on self-awareness. There's nothing more unattractive when you're dating someone, or unattractive when you're talking to someone that just has no self-awareness or no willing to say like, I'm wrong.
Right.
I made a million mistakes in my life. And I think it's one of the biggest things, just like, hey, I made this mistake, but this is the direction I'm going to go. I also think too, curiosity is something, with this, we're going to have you come back on. But I think curiosity is something that people overlook, or it's forced. And I think it's not hard to just walk up to someone and like just genuinely be curious. And I think this is something when I was little, my mom was like, you ask why so many times. So I think I kind of had it in my brain, like it's annoying to ask why, but now it's coming from a place of like, I just want to learn. And 90% of people want to help you learn. Like, you're a great example. I've had so many people on the podcast that have had so much success, and they're like, this is what I love doing, is sharing with people how I've gotten there, because I want to help you. So I just think for everyone out there listening, no matter what you're doing, whatever avenue you're going into, curious, resilience, never settle. I could do a whole episode on that. I don't believe you should settle in any aspect of your life, relationships, personal, professional. So Nick, thank you so much for coming on. You have so much good insight. You'll be back for a part 2. He's shaking his head, but seriously, you're reading my mind on so many things. If there's 1, 2, or 3 last piece of advice that you want to leave the audience with, take it away.
I feel like I've talked way too much.
That's what you're here for.
Yeah, I would just say, I'm just tapping into so many corny sports cliches, but if you get what would like Denzel say, get knocked down 8 times, get up 9. That's it, right? I mean, I loved sports. I love business more, and there's really, really defined rules around sports that, a strike is a strike, a ball is a ball, a first down is a first down. And I love that business, obviously it needs to be legal, but you get to sort of define the rules. Like, I read earlier that there's a lot of companies right now that are offering 3-day work weeks. I mean, it's like there's so many, little intangibles that you can play with, that you have at your disposal. I love the flexibility that business has. And so I would just tell people, nothing is definite. So just if you're not where you want to be, then, just stay at it. Like I said a second ago, remain curious, keep trying to learn and identifying ways to evolve and get better, and then applying the right amount of, tenacity, and then just repeat those things over and over. I think you're going to end up, doing really, really well. So that's it. Appreciate you having me.
Okay, one last question. I don't think I told you this, so if you won't need a second. What are you grateful for? That's how we end every single episode.
I love that. Grateful to be here, for sure, especially after the day I told you I had today.
He's alive.
That seemed like, some small things that seemed really small, just being here right now is like a big deal. That seemed like a very low percentage chance 4 hours ago. Not very grateful for my friends and family, for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on, and I'm always grateful for this podcast and friends, family, health, all of the above. And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week. Woo!